So love is love. Love is great. But tell me, what does love actually mean?
So there's a number of types of love. So there's maternal love or romantic love, love for our family members, love for our friends, pets, country, sports teams, even instruments, I've heard. There's no actual scientific definition of all those types of love. But in terms of romantic love, which is what I study, I like the definition that says it's a motivational state that serves reproductive functions.
What's the science behind falling in love with a person?
Science of romantic love is really at the early stages, so we don't know a whole bunch. But what seems to happen is we become attracted to an individual and our brain takes on a sort of change, which means information about our loved one takes on a special meaning. And there's a whole range of downstream cascade effects involving things like oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and opioids. It means our brain react really acutely to that loved one.
So what do we feel when we're in love?
So we don't just feel. So there's a whole range of feelings: elation, melancholy, excitement, physiological arousal. But we also think a lot. There's a lot of cognitions associated with romantic love, particularly obsessive thinking. So people who are in love have these intrusive thoughts about their loved one up to 50% of their waking hours.
But what about if you're like married to, say, forever? Do you still feel that way even though you love them?
So generally, romantic love, which is that thing that happens at the beginning of a relationship where you go a little bit crazy and think your partner's the best thing ever, that does tend to fade. Although there is a rare phenomenon called long-term romantic love where people who have been in a relationship for decades or even longer are still wildly, passionately in love with their partner.
How rare is that?
We're not sure, and maybe 20% of people might experience that.
Adam, you know that saying crazy in love. Have you found that that's true?
Since the ancient Greeks, people have been drawing analogies between mental illness and romantic love. They used to call it love sickness, and it was associated with melancholia and suicide attempts and all sorts of things. So when we fall in love, the brain does undergo changes and we lose a bit of rationality. Sometimes we make bad decisions. Everybody has a friend who's fallen in love with somebody who wasn't right for them. There's also changes in mood and something called positive illusions, which are somewhat like delusions, where we think our partner is really, really good.
We all think our partner's good. That's why we're with them. What about heartbreak too, if you fall out of love?
Sure. So that's studied in the context of unrequited love. So there's been a number of studies looking at people who have basically been ditched. And it's somewhat akin to an opioid withdrawal, somewhat like heroin addiction. Very similar to grief. When we fall out of love, we can't sleep. Often we don't eat. We're sad. We have crying spells, those sorts of things.
And what was the most surprising thing? I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of surprising things about your study, but was there something that stood out?
So we did a study looking at the differences between women and men, and we were surprised to find there's actually not that many differences. There are some small differences in that women feel romantic love slightly more intensely and they obsess about their partner a little bit more than do men. And men fall in love roughly 1 month earlier than do women.
Why do you think people haven't studied love much before?
I think it's an interesting and fascinating area to study. But there is some people, and even in the scientific community, who think it's this magical, mystical thing that shouldn't be subject to scientific inquiry. I think they're wrong.
I think I would agree with you on that too, because the physiological effects of love, like you said, if your partner breaks up with you or if you really fall in love, your body feels that way, doesn't it?
Oh, it's one of the most intense experiences we'll ever experience.